critical condition.
There's been a few headstrong people in the National Party of late.
The coalition in a coma as old partners, the Nationals and Liberals, fight, and both weigh dumping their leaders.
We had a gun held to our head by the Nats, unfortunately.
The issue? Can the coalition be resuscitated?
To be frank, I'm not sure how we recover that at this point in time.
Or is the alliance behind Australia's Conservative governments for longer than most can remember now history? Hello, welcome to The Issue. I'm Tim Lester. New South Wales MP Michael McCormack was Nationals leader and deputy to two Liberal Prime Ministers, Turnbull and Morrison. Tasmania's Richard Colbeck was first elected to the Senate a quarter of a century ago and has been a Liberal since 1990. Both know their party rooms backwards. Today, as those party rooms prepare to meet in Canberra, McCormack and Colbeck are tackling the issue. Senator Richard Colbeck, thank you for joining The Issue. What do you expect to happen when your party room meets?
Well, I would hope that we get about continuing the business of providing an effective opposition and focus on the issues that mattered to Australians, which is holding this government to account. Their response to Bondi was very disappointing, and they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to any effective action. And yet we somehow managed to make ourselves the issue, and I think that we need to be prepared to put that aside and get on with the job of holding the government to account. And I think in the interests of the long term, that's what we should be doing.
Would you expect there to be a three-way contest for leader?
I would hope that there's not a contest at all. Susan, I think, has done a really good job over the summer, and I don't think she deserved what was imposed on the coalition or on the Liberal Party in particular by the National Party last week off the back of the legislation that was passed. And I think it's hugely disappointing that it became as personal as it was, directed towards her from the National Party. I think that was not what the Australian community expect of us, and they want to see us getting on with the job of governing, not squabbling amongst ourselves. And I think that's reflecting on all of us in a number of different ways.
So your read of the politics at the moment is that there doesn't appear to be any real leadership challenge build-up going on?
Look, there's clearly some chatter. You wouldn't be talking to us if there wasn't. That's obvious. I think that's relatively confined within our party, and obviously the National Party are making a big deal of it. That's hugely disappointing. I would expect more of the National Party. We've been really strong coalition partners for a long period of time.
Politics has been moving fast in recent days. We recorded our conversations with the two long-time politicians on opposite sides of the coalition split as events were developing. In the case of Michael McCormack, we spoke just before the first formal moves to force a leadership vote in the Nationals. Queensland National Colin Boyce announced a challenge to leader David Littleproud, arguing the split in the coalition amounted to going over a political cliff.
Potentially, the National Party is committing political suicide doing this. David has made some bad decisions recently, I think. He's said some things that he shouldn't have said.
Michael McCormack, thank you for having a chat with The Issue. This has been a tough time for a person who holds the National Party in their heart, hasn't it?
It has been a tough time, and it's been a difficult time on a number of fronts. I wish things in the past week had been different, but unfortunately they're not, and we now have to work with the situation as it is. I think a lot of what happened last week could have been easily avoided, but it all started, of course, with Labor rushing legislation into the Parliament and then very much managing the process by which it went through the Parliament.
The coalition has only ever split 4 times, 1972, I think 1987, then it held for almost 40 years, and it's split now twice in the last 9 months. That points to a wider problem, doesn't it?
Well, I know that last year we split on divestiture, on universal service obligations, the regional fund, and indeed the nuclear situation, and we made that a line in the sand as far as the Nationals were concerned, that we weren't going to back down on that. There was a bit of to and fro. We had an 8-day divorce as such and got back together, thankfully. The difficulty now is that we've seen what's happened in the last few days, and we've split up again. But we can't afford this to go on for too long, because once those shadow ministry positions that the Nationals held are filled by a Liberal, it does create difficulty in how then you backtrack from that, either under Susan Lee or a different Liberal leader. And of course, the Liberal leadership is entirely a matter for the Liberal Party room. I understand that. I respect very much that.
So when would you expect Susan Lee will fill those front bench positions vacated by Nationals? How soon?
Well, let's see what happens within the Liberal Party room next week. That's probably first order of business for the Liberal Party. They may well decide that all is as need to be, and there may not be a spill. I don't know. I very much respect Susan. I've also got a lot of time for both Andrew Hastie and Angus Taylor. They seem to be the ones, of course, in the spotlight at the moment, but that is entirely a matter for the Liberal Party room.
Isn't there a danger here that Susan Lee actually locks in a new front bench quite quickly? And by doing that, she kind of pours concrete on the split between the two, because, as you say, the Nationals can't come back into the shadow ministry anytime soon.
Well, 100%, you're right. Absolutely. That is problematic. And that's a good analogy that you've used. It is pouring concrete onto a situation that then would take months to unravel. And we don't want that.
At the heart of the split, comments made by Nationals leader David Littleproud in the news conference where he called time on the coalition. Comments about Liberal leader Susan Lee.
We cannot be part of a shadow ministry under Susan Lee. There is no shadow minister that wants to serve in Susan Lee's shadow ministry.
As you'll see, there are Nationals happy to work with Susan Lee, but for Liberals like Richard Colbeck, the Nationals leader crossed the line. He began dictating who they could choose as leader. So, Richard, what's caused this latest split in the coalition?
Well, it's the attitude of the National Party, unfortunately. I can't speak for what happens inside the National Party room, but an ultimatum was put to the Liberal Party. We had a gun held to our head by the Nats, unfortunately, and it's put us in a very, very difficult situation. And to be frank, I'm not sure how we recover that at this point in time. We need to have those conversations. I mean, we are stronger together. We're unlikely to govern separately. I think we all understand that. And there are a range of ramifications that flow from us not being in coalition.
So the coalition, I think, has only split 4 times in its history. 1972, in the mid-1980s, and then for about 40 years it held together seemingly perfectly fine, and it's split now twice in the last 9 months. What's changed? What's gone wrong?
Well, that's a great question, Tim, and I think we all need to look at ourselves in the way that we manage the relationship between the two parties. I think there's certainly been a different approach in recent times, and the fact that we've split twice in the last 12 months, I think, says something for that. The real task is how we pull the whole show back together again. You know, as I said, I've been fortunate to work with some great statesmen. John Anderson, Warren Truss, Tim Fischer was just before John, of course, but to work with those guys was a real privilege. Warren Truss, terrific guy, did some great work. All of those in that history. There's been a different approach of recent times, and I think a bit of a falling away of respect, to be frank, between the parties.
Where did that falling away of respect begin?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't spent too much time thinking about that, to be frank, but clearly there's an enmity that sits there at the moment. That needs to be resolved. Both the parties respectively need to spend some time considering that. The sooner it's done, the better, from my perspective. But we can't be in a situation where we have ultimatums put to us on either side of the equation. And I think people need to think about that before they start going down that track.
Ultimatums. David Littleproud says the Nationals simply cannot be in government with a Susan Lee-led Liberal Party. How acceptable is that?
Well, that's an ultimatum that's not acceptable. The Liberal Party determine who the leader of the Liberal Party is, and it should always be thus. I, frankly, find it very difficult to accept a situation where we would now move to a leadership change, but just because David Littleproud has made that statement. I think that would be the wrong thing for us to do. So we don't do ultimatums. The leadership of the National Party is a matter for the National Party. The leadership of the Liberal Party is a matter for the Liberal Party.
Might it be that David Littleproud has actually fatally undermined his own leadership by making that ultimatum?
Well, it may be, but again, I'm not going to go down the path of doing what I've criticised the National Party for doing, which was putting an ultimatum to them. But I have to say, I think I would find it very difficult to go back into coalition with the National Party with David at the leadership.
Right, so that's the effect of shooting himself in the foot, isn't it?
I don't think he's done himself any favours. I mean, for him to come out so hard and to personally put all of this on Susan and blame her for everything, I think was a really unfortunate move. It was the wrong thing to do. He's effectively gaslighting Susan, and I don't appreciate that at all. And I think that all of the members of my party ought to consider the effect of us then making a move on our leader at the determination of another party. That would be the wrong thing for us to do.
You talk about the effectiveness of the opposition when it comes back to Parliament from Tuesday. Can it be effective if it hasn't got a shadow ministry list? And when, therefore, would you expect Susan Lee to announce that?
Well, it has to have a shadow ministry list prior to coming back, in my view. That's the role. There will be questions that need to be asked across various portfolios. As I said, this is not necessarily a government that's doing a wonderful job. There are plenty of questions to be asked, and the week after we come back to recommence for the year, we've got estimates. So there's a lot of work to do there too. There are a whole series of mechanical things that need to be done over the next couple of weeks for us to effectively do our job. We're best focusing on that and not talking about ourselves.
We're speaking with Liberal Richard Colbeck and the Nationals' Michael McCormack. You just expressed some support for Susan Lee. Could you as a National work with Susan Lee as the Liberal leader going forward?
Well, I have. I've always worked with Susan Lee. She's in the adjoining electorate. Much of her electorate of Farrer is, in fact, the territory that was once Riverina, Heartland Riverina, and certainly right up until 2016 when the boundaries were changed. I've worked with her for many, many years. I've always respected her. I don't think she's had a fair go. I will say that. I think there are some sections of the media and indeed the commentariat and indeed even her own party who probably haven't given her the clear air that she's needed. It's always hard when you are a political leader and you are trying to seek a bit of clear air so that you can get that necessary cut through in the media, out into the public, to talk about the things that are important to them. And she hasn't been always able to do that.
But she's done okay.
She has. She has. I mean, and you look at her media conferences and whatever else, she's always had a clear picture of what's important. Look, you're always going to make a few missteps and you're always going to make a few judgment calls that perhaps won't go down well on X or Instagram or social media. But look, that's just the way politics is these days. But I have to say, in holding the government to account for its failings with the cost of living crisis, Susan has done well.
So was David Littleproud right then to say that the Nationals can't work with Susan Lee going forward?
David Littleproud was understandably upset that he had three shadow ministers, cabinet ministers indeed, who lost their spots last week.
Isn't the problem here David Littleproud has locked out Susan Lee as a possible Liberal leader by saying the Nationals simply won't work with her? And what we might finish up getting is Liberals saying, well, damn you, we're going to select our own leader.
I don't think it's helpful when a leader perhaps suggests that we can't work with somebody from another party. I think in politics, politics can be often the art of compromise.
So if the Liberals do stick behind Susan Lee, would you expect that David Littleproud will eat a bit of humble pie here and allow the Nationals and the Liberals to come back into coalition?
Well, that's a question you'd have to put to David Littleproud. I know there's been a few headstrong people in the National Party of late.
You say headstrong. Can you tell us who's been headstrong in Nationals ranks?
Look, there's a feeling in the room that those shadow cabinet ministers have been slighted somewhat. They did the right thing by handing in their resignations, but I think there's been fault on both sides.
But Michael, in terms of those who've been headstrong in your own party, you wouldn't name them, or would you?
No, I wouldn't, because I think what is said within the confines of National Party meetings, our own party room meetings, as always, the convention has been that we leave it there. I just know that there's been I know there's been a feeling amongst the party that those three initial resignations should not have been accepted.
A desperate overreach by...
So what if the coalition parties can't reunite and sustain the alliance? What then is the alternative to Labor? We put the unknown to both of our guests. First, Richard Colbeck.
The problem for the National Party is that if they're not part of the coalition, they're no longer a party of government, and that has an impact for them and their supporters. And as I said, I think we're stronger together. So there are a whole series of ramifications that flow from this split, and cool heads need to prevail, and we need to work together to mend the relationship. It's going to take a little bit of time, I think, because there's an element of trust that's been lost across the two parties, but we need to be prepared to make those decisions with a cool head and one that looks to the long-term future of our two parties.
Elections for the whole of our lifetimes, and that's not a short time. The whole of our lifetimes are boiled down to contests between Labor and the coalition, with the coalition widely regarded by many as the natural answer for government in Australia. If the coalition isn't reformed, what's the next election look like?
Well, that's a great question, Tim, and it changes things significantly because you end up with a whole range of contests where there wouldn't normally be contests.
Is the net effect of the coalition not reforming a sort of fait accompli that the Albanese government would be re-elected next time round?
Yeah, again, an interesting question. To be frank, as we came back to the Parliament after the summer, I saw the Albanese government in a much weakened position because of their poor response to the events at Bondi. Unfortunately, the events of the last week have let them off the hook from that. Things can change very, very quickly.
Fair to say, without the coalition, neither the Liberals nor the Nationals can be a party of government. Neither can win government.
I think that's a correct statement, absolutely. I mean, there's only been a couple of occasions in the last 40 or 50 years where the coalition or the Liberal Party didn't need the National Party, and I think 1996 might have been that election. But John Howard knew the value of the coalition, and despite the fact that the Liberals could have governed on their own, he kept the coalition, he maintained the relationship, and we saw a good government for another decade or so.
Richard, if you can't reform the coalition in the short to medium term, would you expect the Liberal Party to be running candidates in currently national held electorates at the next election?
Well, look, that may happen. And again, I think that's probably one of the undesirable effects of us not working together. Each of us have attractions in different electorates. The National Party have focused for a long period of time on being a party for regional Australia. The Liberal Party has a lot of regional members around the country. If we're not careful, we'll end up being two parties fighting over the regions, if you like, and not having an effect in the cities.
Could it be that to win government and win over the votes necessary, the Liberals might end up working out a preference deal with One Nation?
Look, I wouldn't see that as a desirable outcome. I mean, One Nation is a party of protest. They're not a party of government. They're not a party that's offering solutions to the Australian community, as the Liberal Party and the National Party have done in a combined way in the past. We need to, I think, focus on the relationship with a long-standing partner, a successful partner, and that should be where our focus lies. And as I said, we need to be able to have the sensible conversations in that light.
And yet the party of protest at the moment, according to the latest news poll, has a primary vote greater than both of the coalition parties combined.
Well, I think that's because we're not focusing on what we should be focusing on. We're talking about ourselves rather than representing the Australian people. It's very easy to be populist. It's difficult to govern. It's very, very difficult to govern.
As you try to explain the politics that led the coalition to this problem, to this level, do you think the polling that One Nation has received recently is partly to blame, that people have been spooked by it?
Look, I think the situation that brings us to today is more about the internals of the National Party than it is the Liberal Party. And, you know, they've lost a former leader, a former Deputy Prime Minister who's left the National Party to go to One Nation. I think that is having an effect on the thinking within the Nationals. I don't think there's any risk of that. That's
the Barnaby effect.
Well, I mean, Barnaby is a giant personality. I've worked very closely with him in a portfolio sense before. He's good to work with, but his leaving the National Party is a seismic event for them. It has to have an effect. Unfortunately, part of that effect has been deflected onto the Liberal Party by the events of last week, in my view. Now, that's my opinion. Other people may dispute that, but that's my opinion. I think that there's a lot in the National Party who are looking over their shoulder at Barnaby leaving and joining One Nation, and it's causing a reaction. Unfortunately, that's impacted on the coalition, and of course the Liberal Party leaves us with the circumstance that we have now.
Richard, by the end of this coming sitting week, where do you expect things to be? What will it look like?
Gee, I wish my crystal ball was that clear, Tim. Look, I would hope that as a Liberal Party, we have coalesced and consolidated around our leader, who has been subject to treatment that I think is completely and utterly unfair, and that we've commenced those conversations with the National Party to rebuild the partnership.
That's your hope, but not necessarily your prediction.
Well, I think we should consolidate around our leader. I genuinely do believe that. I don't think that we can tolerate being told by another party, whoever they are, who our leader is.
Senator Richard Colbeck, good luck in the time ahead, and thank you for speaking with the issue.
Thanks, Tim.
And from Michael McCormack, Colin Boyce says potentially the National Party is committing political suicide doing this. Suicide? Is it that much of a risk?
Well, the issue is that throughout New South Wales and Victoria, where we stand as nationals, what you will see is potentially three-cornered contests. What you will see in the next election in 2028 is due. What you will see is Senate tickets where the Nationals go it alone. What you end up with, or what we could end up with, is a whole host of three-cornered contests. And when you're in a situation where you've got a cashed up One Nation, you've got the Teals on the move, the Voices for movement, none of them are going to be giving us preferences. None of them are going to be doing the right thing by the National Party. And so what you end up with is you're up against a lot of them. And it does make it more difficult.
How important is it that the coalition get back together before we go to another election?
Absolutely crucial. I mean, you mentioned what Colin Boyce said before. I agree with him. It was strong language used by him, but he's right. To stay separated would be disastrous. And it would, I fear, consign us to opposition for at least another election, if not another term. I'm a National Party person through and through, and I'm also a coalitionist. I know that the best form of government for Australia is a coalition government functioning well and addressing the issues of importance to everyday Australians. And at the moment, that seems a long way away, Tim. So we need to be better. We need to have cool heads prevail.
Michael McCormack, thank you for taking time to speak with the issue.
Anytime at all. Thanks, Tim.
I'm Tim Lester. This has been The Issue. You can listen to us as a podcast, watch us on YouTube, or catch some of the sharpest comments on 7 News. Follow us where you can and join us next time for a new issue and a new guest or guests to unravel the answer for us. Till then, all the best.